Chapter 1. The Outcast of the Galaxy. The planet was a forgotten rock on the outskirts of the galaxy, far from trade routes, military patrols, or anything resembling civilization. Its atmosphere was thin, barely breathable, and dust storms raged across the barren landscape with relentless fury. The locals, if any had ever existed, were long gone, leaving only the faintest traces of structures that had once been towns or way stations. Now, they were empty shells, half buried in sand and rubble. In one of these structures, a makeshift shelter clung to life in the shadow of a crumbling mountain. Its inhabitants, a group of young alien girls, were survivors of a twisted galactic tradition. Each of them had been abandoned here by their respective societies, cast aside as defective due to traits their world saw as flaws, not gifts. They were alone, desperate, and each day was a struggle against hunger, thirst, and the ever-present threat of discovery by hostile forces. Nara, the eldest among them, bore a skin tone of deep, radiant blue color her kind considered a bad omen. Her large, amber eyes scanned the horizon every day, hoping against hope for a ship, any ship that might see them, help them. To her right, Talia, a slight figure with soft lavender hair and sensitive silver-tipped ears, sat huddled under a blanket, shivering despite the harsh, hot winds. Talia's hearing was so acute that even a small sound could overwhelm her. Her society had found it strange and frightening, so they left her here. Mira, the smallest and perhaps the youngest, had wings beautiful, translucent things that caught the light in fleeting rainbow hues. Her people had condemned her for her mutation, believing wings were a throwback to a primitive era in their evolution. And then there was Suri, with telepathic abilities she could barely control, a trait that made her own people shun her. She was fragile, more so than the others, for the constant influx of emotions and thoughts from those around her had weakened her mind over time. For months they had survived on scraps, salvaging whatever they could find in the old structures or foraging in the bleak, barren landscape. Their desperation was so profound that even the faintest promise of salvation seemed too much to hope for. Then, one evening, a faint blip on their makeshift scanner distress beacon salvaged from the ruins caught Nara's attention. It was so faint she almost dismissed it as an error. But when it repeated, she realized it wasn't a mistake. She had activated the distress signal days before, more out of habit than real hope, and now, something was responding. In a ship far above the planet's surface, Ryan Monroe, a human cargo pilot, leaned forward in his cockpit, squinting at the console. He was used to strange signals out in the galaxy's forgotten reaches, but this one seemed different, weak, persistent, and somehow desperate. His conscience gnawed at him. He had always been one of those humans who believed that every life deserved a chance. Could be pirates, he muttered to himself, tapping the controls to stabilize his trajectory. Or just interference. But something about the signal wouldn't let him leave it alone. Against his better judgment, he altered course, setting a landing path toward the coordinates. As he descended, the ship's thrusters kicking up massive clouds of dust, Nara and the others watched in awe and fear. A human ship, no less, was coming down, actually landing. The stories they'd heard about humans were a mixed bag. Some said they were ruthless warriors, others painted them as compassionate wanderers of the stars. Either way, they knew the encounter could determine their fate. The ramp lowered, and Ryan emerged, his silhouette framed against the dim light of his ship. He took a cautious step forward, scanning the area, and then he saw them, a group of girls, clearly alien but so unmistakably vulnerable, their eyes wide with a mix of wonder and suspicion. "Hello?" he called out, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I'm here to help. Got your distress signal?" Nara stepped forward, her heart pounding. She could sense the strength in him, a resilience that seemed to shine even brighter amid the ruin around them. But she was also cautious. "You're a human," she replied, her voice wary, her gaze sharp. "Why would you help us?" Ryan paused, surprised by her directness. "Well, I don't see why I wouldn't. You look like you could use some help." He gestured to the crumbling shelter behind them. "This place, it's no way to live." The girls exchanged glances, each of them uncertain. They had seen the cruelty of their own societies, their indifference and abandonment. Yet here was a stranger, a human, offering them aid without asking anything in return. Mira, the youngest, edged forward, her delicate wings fluttering slightly. "If we go with you, where will you take us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he admitted, "but wherever it is, it'll be safer than here." Slowly, the girls began to trust him, sensing the sincerity in his words. They gathered their few belongings, and one by one, they climbed aboard his ship, casting nervous glances at each other and back at the planet they had called home for so long. It felt strange to leave, like abandoning the only thing they'd ever known, even if it was a prison. As the ramp closed and Ryan prepared the ship for takeoff, he glanced back at his unexpected passengers. "I'll do my best to get you somewhere safe," he promised, offering a small, reassuring smile. Nara nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you, Ryan," she said, testing his name as if it were foreign. "You might be the first being who's shown us kindness in a very long time." With that, the ship lifted off, leaving the desolate world behind. As the stars stretched out before them, the alien girls felt the faint stirrings of hope, something they hadn't dared to feel in far too long. And for Ryan, the journey ahead seemed uncertain, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. Chapter 2. The Journey of Trust. Ryan's ship, the starbound Voyager, was by no means a luxury vessel. Its hallways were narrow, its rooms small, and its walls were worn from countless trips across rough space. Yet, as the alien girls explored their temporary refuge, they marveled at the sheer variety of items and objects Ryan had collected. Each artifact seemed to tell a story, from strange Earth memorabilia to various trinkets he'd picked up from distant worlds. For the girls, the ship was a place of mystery and wonder, an unexpected sanctuary amid the vast cold of space. The first days aboard were quiet and tense. The girls kept mostly to themselves, whispering in hushed tones as they adjusted to their new environment. Ryan did his best to give them space, knowing they were processing a whirlwind of emotions from relief and gratitude to fear and uncertainty. After all, he was human, a species known for both compassion and conquest. The stories they'd heard painted humans in shades of brutality and heroism alike, making it hard for them to determine which version of him was true. But Ryan was patient. Each day, he made small gestures leaving food for them, adjusting the ship's temperature to suit their varied needs, and showing them how to navigate the ship's safety systems. Slowly, he introduced them to the technology on board, explaining each button, lever, and display with a patience and kindness that surprised them. One evening, as Ryan prepared a meal in the ship's small kitchen, he noticed Nara watching him from the doorway. Her eyes were still wary, yet there was a glimmer of curiosity in her gaze. "You're welcome to join me," he said, nodding toward the table. "I don't know if you'll like it, but you're welcome to try." Nara hesitated, then stepped forward, cautiously sitting across from him. Her gaze flicked over the simple meal protein packs, a handful of vegetables he'd managed to grow on board, and something that looked vaguely like bread. She picked up a piece, nibbling tentatively. The taste was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "What do you gain from this?" Ryan looked at her, sensing the weight behind her words. "I don't expect anything in return," he replied honestly. "I've seen a lot of people out there, some in bad situations, others in worse. I guess I just don't believe in abandoning people who need help. And it seems like you all could use a friend." Nara studied him, her gaze sharp. "Where I come from, friendship is not given so freely. People act only if there's something in it for them." Ryan chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to surprise her. Maybe that's true in some places, but not everywhere. Humans were complicated. Some of us are ruthless, yes, but others are willing to go the extra mile for someone in need. Maybe I'm just the sentimental type. Over the next few days, Ryan's presence began to break down the invisible walls the girls had built around themselves. Talia, the shy girl with silver-tipped ears, started spending time in the cockpit, watching Ryan navigate the ship. Her sharp hearing picked up on the subtle beeps and whirs of the controls, and she quickly grew fascinated with the intricate process of piloting. One day, as Ryan guided her through a series of basic maneuvers, Talia finally spoke. I used to be afraid of loud sounds," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "On my planet, I couldn't escape them. People thought it was strange that I could hear so well. They said it made me weak." Ryan glanced at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. "You know," he said gently, "sensitivity can be a strength. You can sense things others can't. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." A small, tentative smile appeared on her face, the first genuine one he'd seen. She nodded, seeming lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Meanwhile, Mira, the youngest of the group, found herself drawn to the ship's storage bay, where Ryan kept various mechanical parts and tools. Her fascination with machines was evident, and Ryan noticed her examining the engines with a quiet intensity. "Do you like machines?" he asked one day, watching as she traced her fingers over the smooth metal of a spare thruster. Mira nodded shyly. "Back home, I would watch the workers repair ships. I thought that if I could help fix things, maybe they wouldn't leave me behind." She looked down, her wings folding close to her body. "But they said my wings were a distraction, that I was too different to be useful." Ryan knelt beside her, holding a small wrench. "If you want, I can teach you. Machines don't care if you have wings or not. They just need someone who understands them." The offer lit a spark in her eyes, and she accepted eagerly, learning to tighten bolts and check circuits with a growing sense of confidence. For Suri, the telepath, the adjustment was perhaps the hardest. Her mind was a constant storm of emotions, a whirlwind of feelings she struggled to contain. Being around the others was exhausting, as every thought and feeling washed over her, leaving her drained and anxious. One evening, Ryan found her sitting alone in a darkened corner of the ship, her hands pressed to her temples. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft. Suri shook her head, barely able to look at him. "It's too much," she whispered. "All the emotions, the thoughts, they're like waves crashing into me. I can't block them out." Ryan thought for a moment, then took a step back, giving her space. "What if we tried something different? Close your eyes. Focus on just one sound. Maybe the hum of the engines." His voice was calm and steady, a gentle anchor. Suri closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as she focused. The sound of the engines, steady and rhythmic, became a focal point, something to hold on to amid the chaos of her mind. Slowly, she felt herself relax, the flood of emotions dimming to a manageable level. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice filled with relief. For the first time in what felt like ages, she felt a sense of calm. As the days passed, the girls began to feel safer, a fragile but growing trust forming between them and the human who had taken them in. They laughed together, shared stories, and gradually, the fear they once held began to dissolve. Each girl found a small piece of herself that she had thought lost forever, rekindled by the kindness of a stranger. However, their journey was far from over. Late one night, as they neared the edges of a neutral system, the ship's sensors began to blare, the flashing lights casting an eerie glow across the cockpit. Ryan and the girls rushed to the controls, their faces pale as they saw the threat displayed on the screen. A pirate vessel, larger and faster than their own ship, was tailing them at high speed. "Pirates," Nara whispered, her voice trembling. The memory of their last encounter with the pirates, the fear and the pain, flooded her mind, and she clenched her fists, fighting to keep calm. Ryan assessed the situation, his jaw set in determination. "They're after you, aren't they?" The girls nodded, their faces filled with dread. It had only been a matter of time before someone discovered them, and now, their newfound sanctuary was threatened. But Ryan's gaze was fierce, unwavering. "I'm not going to let them take you. We're going to make it through this." With the girls' help, he devised a plan, using every trick he knew to evade the pirate ship. He rerouted power, shut down unnecessary systems, and pushed the engines to their limits. The girls, each in their own way, contributed, working alongside him to keep the ship functioning under pressure. Mira, using her newfound skills, stabilized the engines, while Talia listened for the pirates' maneuvers, providing crucial information. The battle was intense, and for a moment, it seemed they might not make it. But together, they outmaneuvered the pirates, slipping past their scanners and disappearing into the safety of a dense asteroid field. As the threat faded, the girls finally breathed a collective sigh of relief, their gratitude evident in their eyes. They had faced danger together, and in that crucible of fear and determination, a deeper bond had been forged. Ryan had proven his loyalty, and in him, The girls had found an ally they could trust, a rare gift in a galaxy that had turned its back on them. As the ship sailed on, their hearts lightened, knowing that perhaps, just perhaps, they had found a place to call home. Chapter 3. Facing Shadows. The starbound Voyager drifted through space, the hum of the engines creating a calm, rhythmic backdrop. But within the ship, a storm brewed. The encounter with the pirates had shaken the girls deeply, resurrecting fears and memories they had struggled to bury. As they quietly processed what had happened, Ryan watched over them with a mixture of concern and helplessness, wondering what more he could do to ease their fears. Over the next few days, the atmosphere aboard the ship shifted. The initial excitement of escape was replaced by a solemn, anxious silence. Each girl had her own way of coping. Nara, ever the leader, became more withdrawn, spending hours alone in the corner of the cargo hold. Mira clung to the ship's engines, throwing herself into learning everything Ryan had taught her, her tiny hands deftly checking circuits and parts. Talia retreated to her quarters, her sensitive ears twitching at every sound. While Suri found herself overwhelmed, the storm of emotions within her threatening to spill over. Ryan knew they couldn't go on like this. Their journey was still far from over, and they couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. One evening, he gathered them in the main hold, hoping to break through the walls each of them had built. "I know the last few days have been rough," he began, his voice soft but steady. "But we're in this together. We're a crew now, whether we like it or not." He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on their weary faces. "I've been in my fair share of scrapes, and I can tell you one thing: when you've got people to lean on, the galaxy seems a lot less dangerous." Nara crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "We're used to surviving alone, Ryan. That's the only reason we're here now. Relying on others, it's not something we're good at." Ryan smiled gently. "That may be, but you're not alone anymore. None of you are. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's facing things together." His words hung in the air, and, slowly, the girls seemed to soften, a flicker of understanding in their eyes. In their own ways, each of them had endured abandonment, rejection, and fear. Trusting Ryan hadn't been easy, but now, for the first time, they felt like they weren't carrying their burdens alone. It was then that the ship's alarms blared, a harsh, unyielding sound that shattered the quiet. Ryan shot to his feet, rushing to the cockpit, the girls following close behind, their eyes wide with fear. On the screen, a message blinked ominously, a warning from an approaching vessel, one far more official than the pirate ship they had escaped. Ryan's heart sank as he read the words, "Attention. Unauthorized individuals on board. Surrender at once." The girls paled, recognizing the insignia displayed on the screen. It belonged to one of the central authorities from Nara's homeworld, a faction infamous for enforcing strict laws and mercilessly hunting down those they deemed outcasts. Their journey had been discovered, and they were now targets. Nara's face twisted with anger and fear. "They're here for us," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They'll take us back, or worse." Ryan clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Not if I can help it," he said firmly, his gaze steely. "I promise to protect you, and I intend to keep that promise." But the odds were stacked against them. The incoming vessel was larger, more advanced, and undoubtedly faster than Ryan's ship. Evading it would be nearly impossible, and a direct confrontation was out of the question. They needed a plan, something unconventional. "What if?" Mira began, her voice hesitant. She glanced at Ryan, then the others. "What if we used the cargo containers? The ones in the storage hold?" Ryan frowned, considering her words. The starbound Voyager had a few large cargo containers, reinforced and fitted with basic life support systems. It was risky, but if they could hide the girls inside and make it seem as if the ship was simply carrying standard cargo, they might just slip past undetected. "It's risky," he admitted, glancing at Nara. "If they scan the ship closely enough, they'll find you." Nara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We don't have a choice. If they find us out here, we'll be dragged back, and our fates will be even worse than before." The girls quickly climbed into the containers, their small forms fitting snugly within the cramped spaces. Ryan adjusted the life support systems, ensuring they would have enough air for the duration of the inspection, and sealed the containers tightly. As he returned to the cockpit, the approaching vessel loomed closer, its dark, metallic hull casting an imposing shadow over the starbound Voyager. Ryan activated his communication systems, his face a mask of calm professionalism as he responded to the vessel's hail. "This is Captain Ryan Monroe of the starbound Voyager," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm a cargo pilot en route to the nearest outpost with a shipment of machinery parts." The voice on the other end was cold and sharp. "Prepare for inspection, Captain. We've received reports of fugitives in this sector, and we'll be boarding your vessel to confirm your cargo." Ryan's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Understood, sir. I'll prepare for boarding." As the inspection team entered his ship, Ryan guided them through the cargo hold, carefully steering them away from the containers holding the girls. He kept his answers short and polite, doing everything in his power to appear cooperative and unassuming. The inspectors moved methodically, scanning every inch of the ship, their eyes sharp and suspicious. One of them paused near the containers, his gaze narrowing as he examined the readings on his scanner. "These readings seem odd," he muttered, motioning for another inspector to join him. Ryan's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Those containers are climate-controlled for sensitive machinery parts," he explained smoothly. "They're sealed tightly to prevent any environmental damage during transport." The inspectors exchanged glances, then nodded reluctantly, satisfied with his explanation. After a tense, agonizing silence, they moved on, eventually concluding their inspection and returning to their own ship. As the vessel drifted away, Ryan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He quickly unsealed the containers, helping the girls climb out, each of them pale and shaken but unharmed. "You did it," Nara whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You actually kept us safe." Ryan managed a small, tired smile. "I told you, I'm not going to abandon you." For the first time, the girls truly felt the weight of his words. This human, this stranger who had no obligation to them, had risked everything to protect them. The depth of his loyalty was something they had never experienced, and it stirred something within them, a sense of hope, trust, and belonging they hadn't felt in a long time. As they gathered in the hold, Talia looked up at Ryan, her silver-tipped ears twitching with a newfound determination. "We don't deserve your kindness," she murmured. "But thank you. For everything." Ryan shrugged, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We all deserve a second chance, and sometimes all it takes is someone willing to give it." In that moment, an unspoken bond formed between them. They weren't just a group of misfits thrown together by chance, they were a team, a family forged through trust and shared struggle. And though they knew the dangers that lay ahead, they also knew that, together, they could face anything the galaxy threw at them. But as they set course for their next destination, a dark shadow lingered on the horizon. Their escape had not gone unnoticed, and forces beyond their understanding were beginning to take an interest in their journey. Little did they know that the challenges they had faced so far were only the beginning, and that their actions had set into motion events that would change the course of their lives forever. Chapter 4: A New Path. As the starbound Voyager moved farther from hostile space, a quiet relief settled over the crew. The girls, having faced both pirates and inspectors, began to let their guard down, if only slightly. They had narrowly escaped a fate they feared more than anything, and while they knew the journey was far from over, they finally had a moment to breathe. Days passed, and Ryan spent the time reinforcing the ship's systems, preparing for whatever lay ahead. He taught the girls how to make minor repairs, how to navigate, and even how to set up a basic defense system. They absorbed his lessons eagerly, each gaining a newfound sense of purpose and confidence. For the first time, they felt useful, empowered by the knowledge he was sharing with them. One evening, as they floated through a quiet, star-strewn part of space, Ryan gathered them in the main hold. He had spent hours poring over star maps, searching for a place where the girls could be safe, somewhere remote and peaceful, where they could build a life away from the shadows of their pasts. "I think I found a place," he announced, gesturing to the holographic map displayed in the center of the room. "There's a system called Horizon 3. It's uncharted, neutral space, and there's an isolated planet with breathable atmosphere and fertile land. No major factions, no settlements. If you wanted, you could make it your new home." The girls looked at each other, processing his words. It was hard to imagine an entire world, just for them, free from judgment and rejection. They had lived as outcasts for so long that the idea of starting fresh felt almost impossible, like a dream they'd once had but had long since forgotten. Nara stepped forward, her gaze steady. "And you? What about you, Ryan?" Ryan smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "My work isn't done, Nara. There are others out there who need help, others who've been abandoned like you. I can't stay, but I'll come back to check on you. Besides," he added with a small chuckle, "I'd just be in the way if you wanted to make this place your own." Nara nodded, understanding but still feeling a pang of sadness. Over the past weeks, he had become more than just a captain to them. He was a friend, a protector, and the one who had seen them as more than just their differences. He had given them a chance to find strength in themselves, and she wasn't sure how they would face this new life without him. The ship drifted silently through space as they approached Horizon 3. The planet, visible now through the viewport, was a lush, green-blue world, its continents scattered like gems across a sapphire sea. It was untouched, wild, and beautiful, a stark contrast to the lifeless, barren rock where they had once been left to perish. As they landed, Ryan helped them unload the few supplies they had: ration packs, tools, and a few pieces of technology he'd managed to scrounge up. He showed them how to set up shelter, how to use the equipment, and gave them pointers on where to find water and edible plants. He spent the next few days with them, helping them get settled, watching with pride as they began to explore their new world. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Ryan sat with them around a small fire. They shared stories, laughter, and even a few tears, the warmth of their bond evident in the gentle glow of the firelight. Talia, her silver-tipped ears flicking in the breeze, looked at Ryan with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I never thought I'd feel at home anywhere," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "But now, thanks to you, I feel like I belong." Mira, ever the curious one, scooted closer, her wings fluttering gently. "You taught us so much, Ryan. Not just about surviving, but about trust, about believing in ourselves." Suri, the quiet telepath, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding. "You gave us hope when we had none. We owe you more than we can ever repay." Ryan shook his head, a soft smile on his face. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what I felt was right. You all have a strength that's rare. Most people wouldn't have survived what you've been through. All you needed was a chance to let that strength shine." As the night deepened, Ryan knew it was time. He rose, looking out over the landscape, memorizing the sight of his new friends on their new world. "I have to go," he said, his voice filled with a bittersweet resolve. "But remember, you're not alone. You have each other, and you have this place a fresh start. Make the most of it." One by one, the girls rose, hugging him tightly, their emotions raw and unguarded. They had come to trust him, to see him as family, and letting him go was harder than they could have imagined. But they knew he was right. They had each other now, and a home where they could finally be themselves. As Ryan boarded his ship, he looked back one last time, watching as the girls waved from the edge of the clearing. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting him into the sky, and soon the planet was a distant green-blue orb against the vastness of space. In the days that followed, the girls began to build their lives on Horizon 3. They crafted shelters, planted crops, and explored the wild terrain, discovering new creatures and landscapes with each passing day. They learned to rely on each other, their unique traits no longer seen as flaws, but as gifts that contributed to the community they were creating. They built a small settlement, one that grew each day, a haven where outcasts could find refuge, where they could live without fear or judgment. And as word spread, others like them found their way to Horizon 3, drawn by rumors of a world where differences were celebrated, not condemned. The planet became a sanctuary for those who had nowhere else to go, a place where everyone was welcomed with open arms. And true to his word, Ryan returned. Every few months, his ship would appear in the sky, bringing supplies, news, and stories from distant worlds. He watched with pride as the girls he had rescued blossomed into leaders, caretakers, and protectors of their new home. Nara led the settlement with wisdom and strength. Talia used her acute hearing to help the community avoid dangers. Mira became an engineer, and Suri taught others how to control and embrace their gifts. As the years passed, Horizon 3 became a legend, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that often seemed dark and unforgiving. And in the hearts of those who called it home, Ryan's name was spoken with reverence, a symbol of the compassion and courage that had saved them all. One evening, as Ryan prepared to depart once more, Nara approached him, a familiar gleam in her eye. "This world exists because of you," she said softly. "We would have been lost without you." Ryan looked out over the thriving settlement, the fields filled with laughter and life. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "This world exists because of all of you. You built this. You found a way to survive and thrive. I was just the one lucky enough to witness it." With a final wave, he boarded his ship, knowing that the community he had helped create would endure long after he was gone. As the starbound Voyager rose into the sky, the people of Horizon 3 watched, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope, knowing they were no longer helpless outcasts but a united, resilient family. And Ryan, as he flew off into the unknown, felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. He had given them a chance, and they had taken it, turning it into something beautiful. In a galaxy that often took more than it gave, he had helped create a place that would always give back, a sanctuary for the abandoned, a new path for those who had none.